The jungle was a living wall, thick and oppressive, where every breath seemed filtered through damp earth and the slow rot of fallen leaves. Twin suns filtered light through the canopy in fractured beams, catching on drifting motes of pollen. The air clung to skin and armor alike, heavy enough to feel. To Captain Veldar, it was merely another hostile environment, one he had no doubt would yield to the precision of his squad's craft. He moved at the front, his armor's cloaking field casting ripples across the outline of his form, making him little more than a shimmer in the air. 5 other scouts followed, their footfalls perfectly timed, each step swallowed by the jungle's muffling embrace. They had been dispatched to neutralize a single human soldier, an alleged sniper whose existence had already cost the Zerkath more soldiers than Veldar was willing to admit. Reports from other units painted the picture of a primitive adversary, relying on outdated camouflage techniques. Mud smeared over skin, leaves, and grass stuffed into netting, face paint in dull colors meant to mimic shadows. To Veldar, it was a laughable concept. His squad carried scanning arrays capable of mapping body heat through stone and dense foliage. Their helmets could detect the faint hum of electronics at 100 meters, spot a concealed weapon by its magnetic profile alone. The human's tricks would be useless here. The captain's mandibles flexed into a satisfied curve. Camouflage, he said over the squad secure channel, as if the word itself was a private joke. They think shadows and dirt make them invisible. Trooper Herrick's voice came back with a low, mocking rumble. I heard they coat themselves in swamp filth, as if smelling like a dying animal will keep them safe. That might help them hide from predators on their home world, added Yeldar, his tone dripping with derision. But here, against our scanners, they might as well paint themselves in light. The squad's laughter was low and quick, controlled to avoid carrying through the trees, but the arrogance in it was thick. The air shifted as they moved deeper, the sound of distant birds and chattering primates fading into uneasy quiet. Vines as thick as a soldier's arm dangled from trees whose trunks twisted upward into a canopy that hid the sky. Insect the size of a man's thumb clung to the shadows, their wings flickering in bursts of iridescent green and blue. Veldar's armor registered the ambient heat, oppressive, but not dangerous. The human, wherever he was, would be feeling it far more than they did. Another disadvantage. Herrick slowed briefly, his visor locking on movement in the undergrowth. Thermal spike, small, he muttered, before the display resolved it into an image, a jungle rodent, barely large enough to fill his palm. He grunted and moved on. A single droplet of condensed moisture fell from a high leaf, catching a rare ray of sunlight and scattering it in a quick flash. For the briefest instant, Veldar's peripheral vision caught something similar, a glint that was sharper, cleaner, almost metallic. His gaze snapped toward it, but the space was already empty. The scanners showed nothing. They pressed forward. The squad's formation adjusted slightly to cover more ground without losing cohesion. There was confidence in every movement, though Veldar noticed that the casual air from earlier had thinned into a more professional focus. Still, none of them truly believed they were in danger. The first shot proved them wrong. It was so quiet that Veldar almost missed it, a muffled crack, distant, swallowed by the foliage. Herrick stopped mid-step, a neat, coin-sized hole blooming dark across the joint where his breastplate met his underarm guard. His body stiffened, then toppled silently into ferns. The heat left him before the others even registered what had happened. Contact! Yeldar barked, his weapon sweeping the trees. The squad shifted instantly, scanning arcs overlapping in a disciplined dance, but the data feeds returned nothing. No thermal trace, no EM spike, no visible movement. Direction? Veldar demanded, already cycling his visor through spectrums, infrared, ultraviolet, LiDAR overlays. The jungle glowed with life, each leaf and insect lit in false colors, but no human form appeared. Another crack split the stillness. The scout at the rear jerked as if yanked by an unseen string, a hole punched clean to the narrow gap at the base of his helmet. His body crumpled with no more ceremony than a falling leaf. Veldar's mandibles clicked hard against each other. 2 down, without a single glimpse of their attacker. The range had to be extraordinary. The shots were too precise to come from within their visible perimeter, yet the sound was muted almost to nothing. This was no random survivor firing wildly. This was calculated, deliberate. Thermal sweep. Veldar ordered again, frustration sharpening his voice. The jungle filled their vision in overlapping shades of red, orange, and yellow, yet nothing human stood out. "This makes no sense," Yeldar muttered, unease creeping into his tone. "Even with masking, a human should stand out against this background." Veldar kept scanning, his mind turning over the possibilities. Masking was one thing. Effective masking against their technology was something else entirely. Perhaps the humans' camouflage was more than dirt and leaves after all. A rustle to their left froze them in place. Two scouts swung toward it, weapons raised, visors narrowing on the disturbance. The undergrowth quivered once, then a bird burst upward, flapping madly into the canopy. The scouts lowered their rifles an inch. The third shot came an instant later, punching through one scout's neck joint so cleanly that his head lolled unnaturally before the rest of him collapsed. The jungle seemed to inhale around them, every shadow deepening. 3 left. Veldar felt the prickling sensation of being studied, measured, and found wanting. This was not the work of prey evading predators. This was a predator trimming the edges of his meal. "Spread out," Veldar ordered, forcing steel into his voice. "Make him choose." His 2 remaining scouts obeyed, pushing 30 meters out to either side. The captain kept his own rifle ready, eyes scanning for the faintest sign of movement. Somewhere ahead, the human was watching. Veldar could feel it, a presence just beyond reach. He had fought enemies who roared their fury and charged headlong, and others who stalked in silence before the kill. But this was something different. The silence wasn't absence. It was control. A flicker near the far tree line caught his eye, just enough to make his crosshair twitch in that direction. He didn't fire. He didn't even shift his weight. The rules here were not his own, and one wrong movement could end the game instantly. When the next shot came, it didn't target flesh. It struck a vine above Yeldar's head, sending it whipping down in a sudden, hissing arc instinct made the trooper flinch sideways, stepping into a patch of open ground. That was all it took. The true shot followed, striking his temple plate with unerring precision. Veldar inhaled slowly, forcing his thoughts into order. The human wasn't just killing them. He was shaping their movements, anticipating reactions, and pulling them into positions of vulnerability. "Keep moving," Veldar said, more to hold himself steady than to direct the last surviving scout. His gaze swept the trees, knowing that the next sound he heard might be the last. Sergeant Elias Kane lay prone in the earth, the jungle breathing around him like a living thing. The ground beneath his chest was cool and damp, pressing its weight into his ribs as if it meant to keep him there forever. His ghillie suit was no single shade. It was a patchwork of greens, browns, and grays, stained with mud and streaked with moss until even had trouble finding his own arms against the soil. Thin strips of mesh fluttered faintly in the wind, mimicking the movements of nearby leaves. Nothing about him reflected light. Not the matte black barrel of his rifle, not the sight's glass, carefully painted and dusted with grime. Through his scope, he watched the aliens regroup after the last kill. They moved in staggered lines now, each scanning a different vector, their overconfidence stripped to the bone. The one in charge, Kane had marked him as a leader minutes ago, was taller, carried himself with the tension of someone fighting to keep fear from showing. Kane tracked him for 3 slow breaths, gauging the spacing between steps, the intervals of his glances. Not yet. A smaller alien paused to skin a tree trunk, its weapon sweeping in a tight arc. Kane shifted his aim a fraction and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed crack was no louder than the snap of a twig. The alien dropped without a sound. The leader spun toward the noise, but the jungle swallowed it whole. Kane had already moved. He slid backward like a shadow, rifle close to his chest, boots gliding over the leaf litter without a single crunch. 10 meters behind, a narrow gap in the brush opened into a shallow depression he had prepared before dawn. It was nothing more than a hollow line with ferns and covered in a thin mesh of vines, but it broke every sensor field he knew the aliens would use. His breath came slow, measured. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips, not from fear, but from the calm edge of focus that came only in the midst of a hunt. This was not war to him. This was craft. Through the mesh above, Kane spotted two of the remaining scouts advancing cautiously. Their formation was tighter now, their movements abrupt, their scanning arcs overlapping. He let them pass his first position entirely, then angled his scope through a slit in the foliage. This time, he didn't aim to kill outright. He sighted on the knee joint of the alien on the left and fired. The shot cracked through armor, dropping the scout with a howl. The other darted toward his comrade, instinct overriding caution. Kane watched them huddle for cover and smiled faintly. That was the problem with working in pairs. You shared the same panic. He let them stew there, knowing the leader would hear their calm chatter, feel the draw to that location. The aliens would think they had found a weakness. In reality, Kane had already charted 3 likely approach routes to that spot, and he had lined to fire on all of them. Minutes later, the leader arrived with the last uninjured scout, weapons up. They moved with purpose, scanning every bush and tree trunk. Kane stayed still. The suit covered his heat signature. The mud clinging to him masked his scent against the loam. An insect crawled across his cheek and into the shadow of his scope. He didn't blink. The uninjured scout edged closer to his depression. Through the scope, Kane could see the creature's mandibles working, scanning beam brushing the ground just inches from his position. The green haze of the alien's visor passed over him once, twice. No alarm. The scout moved on. Kane exhaled silently, the air barely disturbing the mesh above him. Patience was the blade's edge. Strike too soon and the prey bolts. Too late and the opportunity is gone. He let them think the sniper had moved on. Then, when the leader stepped into the narrow path between 2 broad trees, Kane fired twice in quick succession. The first shot shattered the uninjured scout's spine. The second ricocheted off a root near the leader's foot, close enough to shower him with splinters. Kane wasn't trying to hit. He was forcing movement. The alien darted sideways, exactly as planned, into a tangle of brush that seemed like cover. A vine snagged his armor, jerking him to a halt. Kane shifted aim, ready to finish it, but the leader tore free and dug behind a log. The game had changed again. The leader stayed down, scanning every direction. His breathing, audible even through Kane's earpiece intercept, was ragged. Kane could hear the muttered command for air support, reinforcements. He smiled without warmth. They wouldn't make it in time. The jungle felt different now. The insects had resumed their hum. The distant cries of unseen birds filtered through the leaves. Kane rolled silently to a secondary firing lane, giving himself a new angle on the log. He could see the edge of the leader's helmet, motionless. He didn't fire. Instead, he eased back into the shadow, letting the alien wonder where he had gone. Uncertainty was a first step toward surrender. Let them imagine every rustle was his approach, every shadow the tip of his barrel. Fear was a better weapon than any rifle. A bead of sweat slid down Kane's temple. He ignored it, watching the wind shift through the treetops. A branch creaked somewhere above. The leader flinched, swinging his weapon upward. Kane noted the reaction time, fast but not fast enough. He thought briefly of the convoys his sniper hunt had interrupted, of the human soldiers in the valley who relied on him holding this ground. The aliens believed themselves hunters. Kane knew better. They were prey that had wandered too far from safety. The leader finally moved, crawling low toward thicker cover. Kane let him get halfway there before lining up another shot. This time, the bullet struck a tree trunk inches from the alien's head, showering him with splinters. The message was clear. I can kill you whenever I choose. The alien froze. His breathing quickened again. Kane could almost taste the decision forming in his mind. Fight, flee, or wait for help. None of those options would save him. Somewhere to the left, a faint metallic click echoed through the trees. The alien's head snapped toward the sound. Kane didn't look that way. He knew exactly what it was. A lure. The game was moving toward its end, but there was one more step to take. He backed away from his current position, every movement deliberate, and slid into a higher ridge that overlooked the area. From here, he could see not just the leader, but the path he would take if panic set in. Kane settled the rifle on its bipod, the crosshairs steady. Below, the leader's visor swept in jerks, hunting for a threat he could neither see nor hear. Kane slowed his breathing until the world narrowed to the heartbeat of the man in his scope. He wouldn't end it yet. Not here. Instead, he waited, letting the alien feel the weight of unseen eyes. The shot would come when it mattered most. Until then, the silence would do the work for him. The jungle reeked of damp soil and burnt propellant, a faint metallic tang clinging to the air where blood had seeped into the roots. Only 3 scouts remained now, their movements clipped and hesitant, the fluid grace of their earlier advance reduced to cautious, halting steps. Captain Veldar's mandibles flexed in agitation, every instinct screaming that the hunt had turned against them. The human sniper was no longer a rumor. He was a shadow with a trigger, dismantling their force one measured shot at a time. He considered ordering a retreat, but the thought curdled in his gut. The Zerkath did not flee from prey. Yet the jungle felt wrong. Its silence was oppressive, pressing in from all sides, as if the very trees had allied themselves with a human. He signaled the 2 survivors to fan out, sweeping in a wide arc. If they moved far enough apart, perhaps they could triangulate the sniper's location. Kane lay 200 meters ahead, his rifle resting on a knotted root, eyes calm behind the scope. He had watched them deliberate through the shifting foliage, noted the stiffness in their postures. They were stretching themselves thin, as he had predicted. The sniper's mind was already mapping their likely paths, marking a narrow ravine ahead as the point where fear would herd them together again. He moved with slow precision, leaving nothing disturbed that could betray his passage. The ravine was shallow, overgrown with vines and carpeted in brittle leaves. Hours earlier, he had laced it with monofilament tripwires strung between natural cover, each tied to charges half buried under dirt. The fishing line was invisible in the jungle's mottled light, ready to turn overconfidence into shrapnel. Veldar advanced at the center of the arc, visor sweeping. A faint ping from his scanner signaled metallic traces ahead. Too small for a weapon, too close to be debris. He crouched, scanning again, but the readings faded into the background static of the jungle. He straightened, uneasy. The right flank scout moved first, stepping into the ravine. Kane heard the faint snap of filament breaking. A heartbeat later, the undergrowth erupted in a roar of concussive force. The scout was torn apart before he could even scream. Shards of armor clanged against tree trunks. Leaves swirled in the blast wave, and Veldar staggered under the shock. The second scout crumpled nearby, his chest plate punctured by a spray of jagged metal. The captain's ears rang. The world narrowed to the pounding of his own pulse. Through the ringing, he caught it, a slow, deliberate sound. Footsteps closing in. He rolled behind the smoldering remains of a tree trunk, weapon raised. The haze of dust and drifting ash blurred his vision, but a figure emerged from the green like a spirit of the forest itself. At first glance, the human seemed woven from the jungle, twigs and moss, strips of tattered cloth and damp earth. No gleam of exposed metal, no sharp edge for light to catch. Only the dark, steady shape of a rifle cradled against his shoulder. Veldar's finger hovered on the trigger. He had faced enemies with claws, with venom, with ships that blotted out the sky, but none had carried death with such quiet certainty. The human's stance was relaxed, almost casual, yet his eyes, narrow, focused, held the weight of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome. The alien's visor fed him no data, no thermal spike, no electromagnetic trace. The man before him might as well have been part of the terrain until the moment he stepped forward. Veldar realized with a clarity that cut deep that their scanners had never failed. They had been outmatched by adaptation, by a predator who needed nothing but patience and a weapon he knew as an extension of himself. Kane didn't speak. He didn't have to. He raised the rifle a fraction, and Veldar saw the dark hollow of the suppressor aimed directly between his eyes. The moment stretched, the jungle's silence deepening into something absolute. The captain's mandibles clicked once, a reflex of defiance, but his weapon stayed lowered. He had the bitter sense of being allowed one last thought before the inevitable. In that instant, he understood why the others had died without warning. There was no contest, only the slow realization that the contest had been over from the start. The shot was almost gentle, a muffled crack that barely stirred the leaves. Veldar's body slumped against a log, eyes glazing as the human stepped past without breaking stride. Kane paused only long enough to kneel by the wreckage of alien gear, slipping a compact scanner from his belt. He downloaded their tactical maps, copied encrypted comms data, and slid it into a pouch. Efficiency nothing wasted. He didn't linger to watch the aftermath. Reinforcements would come soon, drawn by the fading echo of the blast. By then, he would be another shadow among thousands, moving with the wind toward his next firing position. The jungle accepted him back without protest. A few minutes later, the clearing lay still again, littered with armor fragments and scorched leaves. A single vine swung lazily over the ravine, stirred by the fading tremor of the blast. In the canopy above, birds began call once more, their voices tentative at first, then steady. Kane's figure was gone, swallowed entirely by the shifting light and layered greens. Only the memory of his presence lingered, a reminder that in these depths, survival did not belong to the loudest or the strongest, but to the one who knew how to disappear. Somewhere far ahead, another patrol was moving toward this sector, unaware of what had happened here. Kane adjusted the weight of his rifle across his back and kept moving, his eyes already scanning for the next place to vanish. The hunt was not over. It never was.